Hello friends, in the second part we should be discussing, Professor Bajaj should be discussing the English essay in the hands of Leigh Hunt, and she has already talked about the social background of the essay, particularly in the 19th century when different perceptions, different preferences visited the writer of the time. And now there is Leigh Hunt before us, and we are supposed to appreciate his kind of contribution. And once again I request Professor Bajaj to start.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So yes, you see Leigh Hunt's period, if we look at it, it is from 1784 to 1859. That is the age that we are looking at, right? Now, he's obviously in 2 centuries, and he carries the tradition of the 18th century and moves into the 19th century. Also remember that it is a society that is increasingly turning commercial and industrial, and in this society Leigh Hunt strove to defend the values of literature or defend the aesthetic of literature, very much like Shelley, who also tried to defend poetry in a time when everything was being judged on account of its profitability, utility and commercialism. So this is the social background again of Hunt, and Hunt also stood by these ideas of liberty and dignity, and he offered his cultural opinions in in his periodicals. Now he published this liberal weekly which was called the Examiner, that came out in 1808 and continued till about 1821. Then there was the Reflector that he started working on in as early as in 1810, and this was followed by another series that he brought out, the Indicator, that was 1819 onwards, 1819 to 21. Now later on he also wrote for the Companion. So what I mean to say is that these are series of liberal weeklies that came up, and Hunt was constantly writing for them. Some of his best essays actually come up in his later life, like for instance in the Indicator. But I will be, so he was a firebrand really. He actually also criticized no less than the Prince Regent at the time in 1812, which is why he was actually sentenced to 2 years in prison along with his brothers. So he critiqued, he rebuked the Prince Regent at the time in the Examiner, and because of which he had to be convicted. Now it did not deter Hunt from writing. He continued writing and publishing from the prison his works, and he continued to have these literary conversations with fellow writers who would visit him. So it was a very intellectually, I mean, what do you think of this?
Of course, the writer generally doesn't get attention of society.
Yeah.
But there are romantic writers in the early 19th century that people think them threat enough to be taken to the prison.
And but what I feel is that both Hazlitt in that sense and Leigh Hunt, they carry this kind of idealism, such pure idealism that they refuse to really join the rut, and he could not sustain himself, and he struggled with poverty from 1825, even when he was editing these different journals, so much so that Dickens in his Bleak House actually caricatured Hunt, and he created the never to do well character Harold Skimpole on the basis of Hunt, because he thought that he thought that Hunt's life was like that, like Harold Skimpole. So in a way you feel that the writer, people talked about them, about their idealism, but both Hazlitt and Hunt, I think, continued to do the work that they wished to do, and their idealism didn't die even towards the end, even when they've suffered privation, so much so that he had nothing to sustain on, and it was Shelley's son who actually got him annual annuity, etc., because, and then he could make do. So that kind of friendship, that kind of bonds, and that kind of idealism that the writers harbored, I think it was infectious in that age, and no wonder the Romantics felt a sense of unity among themselves, and also a sense of idealism. But let me take you to the Round Table series then that I was referring to. I said that the Round Table served as a place of more familial place, and it wasn't really the kind of coffee house place where there was distance. You see, there is a kind of familial bond and a private space of the dining room that is that exists among friends. You see, coffee space is a very public space, right? It's a public sphere, and it's anybody goes in and comes out, and every time it's a varied group. But Hunt's Round Table believed that it was a private space where only a few group of like-minded people sat together to discuss themes that were close to their heart, right? And these would, therefore they build these kind of relationship of familiality, I would say, or also familial bonds, right? So Hunt proclaims, you know, in the introduction to the round table, and let me quote from the first issue of the round table, he says that we assume no fictitious characters, we prefer at all times a plain straightforward behavior, and in fact choose to be as original as we can in our productions. So you can see very clearly the stamp of the writer. They don't want to assume another name, and they don't want to hide behind forms, and they want to come straight forward with their, or you know, with a clean heart, they want to share what they feel. So it's a lot to do with what they feel and what they think, and you know, and he goes on, let me quote it further. He says, I quote, "We have avoided the trouble of adding assumed characters to our real ones, and shall talk just as we think, walk and take dinner in our own proper persons." So, unquote. You can already see that he's targeting the previous writers who felt and he's not targeting necessarily, because he says that maybe in their own time that was the requirement of the time. But in our time, we want to come out as real people, and we want to take responsibility of what we write, and we are going to write about as we talk, think, walk, take dinner, you know, in our proper persons. So the writer is conscious of the role one plays and is willing to take responsibility of for one's words as well, and is not trying to hide behind a kind of an assumed name or persona or literary characters. So I think that is the, in the introduction to the Roundtable series itself, which is the number 1 essay of the Roundtable series, the Leigh Hunt clarifies what their goal is, you know, that their goal is to get across to the people. Now let's take an example which is number 6 from the Examiner itself. This is on commonplace people. Now, on commonplace people, as the title itself tells you, that you know, he's going to take up, I mentioned in my previous lecture how this was, Leigh Hunt was trying to write about the common people, right, and in common people's language. So he takes up in this essay on commonplace people, he takes up the case of what he calls, or who he calls, the ill-treated body of persons known by the various appellations of commonplace people, dull fellows, or people who have nothing to say. Now, unquote. So the idea is that these are the people we think to be, you know, to be ordinary, mediocre, and you know, not intelligent people. And he says that, and he quotes, and I quote, he says, "All we demand is that they should be kindly and respectfully treated, and not insolently left out of the pale of discourse, purely because they may not bring with them as much as they find, or say as brilliant things as we imagine we do ourselves." Unquote. So there is a sense that you know, there is a kind of a hierarchy that is placed between people who are educated, who are intelligent, or who think that they belong to the elite circles, as against those who seem to have not received any education. In fact, you find that Hunt here tells us that it's not important that we need to find you know, wise people are always the educated ones. So in fact, he is taking a case for these people who are the quiet ones, he says, and he says that it is indeed the quiet ones who play a very important part in our lives. And in this particular essay, he says, and I quote, he says that they are the more silent part of companies, and generally the best behaved people at table. They are the best of dumb waiters near the lady of the house. So the idea, unquote, the idea is that they are the people who are working for you. They are the ones who are the waiters, who are waiting next to the lady of the house. They are the dumb waiters, you know, within quote, who are waiting near the lady of the house without saying anything, and they are the best behaved people around the table, and they are the ones who play the silent part in all companies. You know, they are the more silent part of companies. And yet he says, and I quote, "They are always at leisure to help you to good things, if not to say them. They will supply your absence of mind for you while you are talking, and believe you are taking sugar for pepper." right? So unquote, the idea that these are the people who work behind the scene, these are the people who are forever there at your leisure, he says, and they never speak they never speak their mind, and they're always alert to your demands, and they're always good listeners. So the idea is that he's drawing our attention to a marginalized group of society that is often considered to be mediocre and maybe senseless, and at this he says as definitely not the intelligent intellectuals, so the non-intellectuals, so to speak. And he's talking about all the intellectuals and suggesting that he says in this particular essay on commonplace people, he says, I quote, he says, this is one of the faults of over civilization. In a stage of society like the present, there is an intellectual as well as personal coxcombry apt to prevail, which leads people to expect from each other a certain dashing turn of mind and an appearance at least of having ideas, whether they can afford them or not. Unquote. So, there is, he says that why is it that we are always in our conversations, we always want to impress people with our intelligence. Why is it that we are always thinking that, we expect from each other a dashing turn of mind, and if you are anything less, then you are not worth talking to, right? He says that, all of us are, excel in one or another area or life, and it may not be the case that all of us are intellectuals per se, and that we must not look down upon those who we think as non-intellectuals. And he says this is a product of over civilization in a society like the present. Would you agree with something like that?
Of course, because actually I was thinking as I listened to you that these essays are, and Leigh Hunt in particular, they are forerunner of the shape that novel took in the 19th and 20th centuries. Straight away two writers come to mind, Dickens and James Joyce. They talk in very simple terms, in a very ordinary kind of a prose, and sometimes the effect is very intensified. The effect is of very severe social criticism. So Bernard Shaw also comes to mind, and the kind of characters he chooses for presentation in his plays are similar to the ones that Leigh Hunt has given voice to. So I think it's really remarkable that the novel form and the psychological essay, stream of consciousness essay, could be visualized by people like Leigh Hunt and Hazlitt in the early 19th century.
Right. Also, he says that these are people with their minds endeavor to put on intelligent attitudes. Yes. So there is a kind of hierarchy between intelligent and stupid people or foolish people, and he's trying to look at all these people around him as genuine people who have something to offer. And he says that in fact the intelligent ones become vain because they are not able to see anything good in the other person, and it actually refers to or points to their own inadequacies of judgment, not the inadequacy. While he's thinking the other to be inadequate, he's in fact exposing his own inadequacy in the process, because he's not able to see in the other person anything good or anything that is worth praising. So he says that we are constantly just dealing with attitudes where the mind is constantly trying to put on an intelligent attitude, that we all must look intelligent, and graceful bodies. So he's hitting out at this elitist culture of intelligent, good looking people who dress up well and talk intelligently, but they have no sense of sensibility. Already what he's doing here is that he's making you sensitive. You see, the 18th century essay did not attempt to sensitize the reader. It probably tried to correct the reader of the faults, etc., or satirize the reader. But the 19th century romantic essayist is trying to sensitize the reader to what they are doing. Making them more humanistic, telling them that you are being unjust to anybody you think is uneducated and is therefore not wise or is therefore crude. Right. So in a way, I think that there is a kind of emphasis on feeling, on empathy, that empathizing with other people, at the same time a feeling of doing justice to people. So there is there is this kind of idea about intelligence, but I think it is more emotion or feeling based, the 19th century essay, wherein the writer is making sure that you look at you give the other person the dignity of a human being, and so empathetically approach people around you. So I think you can see the dimension of empathy coming in this particular thing. And he says, that because somebody doesn't play these monkey tricks, he calls them monkey tricks, with his natural deficiency, you call this person a dull fellow, and you scorn this person, and you resent this person because you think this person is not like you. So in a way, you can see these, he calls the intelligent people using monkey tricks to show off their intelligence, and treating everybody around them scornfully with resentment, who they consider dull fellow. So so talking about the deficiency of such persons, so this is what I thought was very interesting about this particular essay on the common people.
It reflects, upon the nature and temperament of the times. They are going to tell what is going to happen later.
Yeah.
The novel, the Oscar Wilde's kind of a thing comes to mind. James Joyce, of course, I've already mentioned. So these people, were very critical of the times, of the people, of the aristocracy, and they were asserting through them, in fact, with the class section of the lower masses.
That was coming up, climbing the social order also.
Yes.
But, and what he says here is that what is truly intelligent, he says, is that are those people who can study human nature in all its bearings. So I think the shift has also occurred from the mind to human nature, and intelligence to be found in studying the human nature. And he says, love it or sympathize with it for all its affections. So you can see the shift has already occurred in the Romantic Essayist from intelligence, rationality, wit, etc., to studying of human nature, love, sympathy, affections. Those are the new words that are, that are being coined and that are being emphasized in the periodical essay that is written by the romantics, and that is considered to be truly intelligent. So, I just wanted to point out how this is also a romantic essay, not just about that, because the themes have changed. Right, the concerns have changed. Now, in another, like I've mentioned, two essays from the Examiner. Let me take you to the Indicator. In the Indicator, in the introduction, is very interesting because by this time, Leigh Hunt has already matured and he is already writing from a very distanced point of view. And I'd like you to comment on this image he uses. He says that he likens the writer to this cuckoo bird, the bee cuckoo or the honey bird. He says that the writer is like this honey bird who, I quote, indicates to honey hunters where the nests of wild bees are to be found. It calls them with a cheerful cry, which they answer, and on finding itself recognized, flies and hovers over a hollow tree containing the honey. While they are occupied in collecting it, the bird goes to a little distance where he observes all that passes, and the hunters, when they have helped themselves, take care to leave him his portion of the food.
So ordinary details of life, they have been turned into a kind of very effective poetry.
Yeah.
So that poetic substance that is there in these essays makes them available to the entire audience.
Very rightly said. A lot of these romantic essays, they actually use their own poems, especially Leigh Hunt, not in his Examiner sort of essays, but the later essays. The Indicator actually has, he says that, I will be giving you some snippets on life, what I think about things, random things, but at the same time, I will try to bring in some of my original poetry. So, and all of them quote from classics, etc. That is the practice that has been there in all English essays. But here the romantic writer actually introduces one's own poems and brings in one's own poems while writing the essay. So, the romantic, because it is the romantic spirit, so the poetic impulse is very strong. So even in the essay, the periodical essay, you find Leigh Hunt adding one or two verses of his own in the middle of his exposition.
And the sentences you quoted, built up a very, very fine metaphor of honey and all those things.
So he says that the writer is like this bee cuckoo or this cuckoo bird that indicates to honey hunters, and honey hunters for him are readers basically, and he is just going to point them out where the essence is.
He is forming an aesthetic.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I found it very interesting. He says that the writer is like the cuckoo bird, the writer of these periodical essays in the indicator. He says is like this bee cuckoo who's going to point out to the honey hunters, that is the readers, to show them where the nests of the wild bees are, which is where the nest of essence of life is.
Very fine,
right?
sustained metaphor.
Yeah, and then he says he will make these cheerful cries, basically make it interesting for the reader, so the reader will come to them, right, which they answer, and on finding itself recognized, it flies and hovers over a hollow tree. So it's done its job. It doesn't, so I think in that sense, maybe it's far-fetched, but to be honest, Leigh Hunt actually in a way says what later on Eliot would go on to say, that the writer's job is only to indicate and not interpret. Right. So Leigh Hunt here says that, you know, the bird will fly away, it will give you, it will show you where the nectar is, where a sense of life is, what is to be looked at, right, and beyond that the writer will not go, and you know, with the writer will be off.
Actually, T.S. Eliot will squirm in his grave.
Yeah, I know. He hated the romantics, but I'm just saying, who knows, he might have taken the idea from here.
Yes, true.
But the object, he says, the object of this periodical work to notice any subjects whatsoever within the range of the editor's knowledge or reading. So the idea here is that the object of the periodical essay for Leigh Hunt is to notice subjects whatsoever within the range of the editor's knowledge or reading. So he's going to take up all these subjects and throw light on them for the reader, for the benefit of the reader, add his opinion, add his viewpoint, and then leave it open for the reader to accept it or reject it. So he will take them up as they happen to suggest themselves to him, and he says that he will just point out their essence to the reader. Now that is the role of the critic in many ways, that the writer is going to point it out, what is to be seen, and to point out the essence, its essence to the reader, why it is important, and at the same time be brief and humorous. So I think that is in nutshell what Leigh Hunt understood the job of this periodical essays to be. The subjects, he says, and I quote, the subjects will consist of curious reflections of biography, short disquisitions on men and things, the most interesting stories in history or fiction told over again, with an eye to their proper appreciation by unvulgar minds. So there are going to be these short disquisitions there on men and things, and most interesting stories in history and fiction told over again.
Why unvulgar?
I am coming to that. With an eye to their proper appreciation by unvulgar minds. So the idea is also that they are again, you know, if you think of for instance Wordsworth in Lyrical Ballads says that, you know, that we need to elevate the mind of the reader and take them away from vulgar life. So I think there is also an attempt by these writers to refine the age which at one level is going into vulgar popular literature or scandal and vulgarity, and also by minds who are going to appreciate. So in a way it is tongue in cheek also, that well, if you are going to appreciate my work, then you will be unvulgar, but if you are vulgar, then you will not be able to appreciate my work. So I think there is a kind of a tongue in cheek comment over there as well, and that is something that Leigh Hunt is does that, and that's the best at wit or humor he'd get. But otherwise he's mostly direct in his statement and idealistic in approach. You know, there's another of his essay in the Indicator which is on books, you know, and it is titled basically, it just talks about my books. Now there, you know, he's become, I noticed that Leigh Hunt even in this latter part of his criticism or the essays that he wrote, in the latter part he had become more self introspective and had become more open as compared to Hazlitt also. So without having an agenda, you know, exactly what Johnson said, a loose sally of the mind, I think Leigh Hunt is able to achieve it in his in this particular series of his essays, because here in the Indicator you find that he is not focused on delivering a speech or delivering an essay or writing out an essay, rather just describing and in a way taking the reader along in his own mental journey. So it's very stream of consciousness sort of a thing, which is very enlightening and exploratory. So I feel that Leigh Hunt is one of the best essayists who have been able to, in the 19th century, who have been able to carry forward the periodical essay to this height, because and he was consistently writing, and the subjects were as varied as the sports, games, fashion, or books. So I think that is what is also speaks about the mettle of the writer.
You have given and shared with the audience very very fine set of preferences, the artistic preferences. So, what in 2 sentences would you say in the form of summing up the contribution that Leigh Hunt made to the readership?
Yes, I think Leigh Hunt added a very intense self-introspective dimension to the periodical essay, even within the Romantic tradition. Even where, so he obviously he was trying to also bring together aspects of aesthetics, art, within the ambit of proper discussion without belittling it, but at the same time look at it as a kind of a more familiar genre and not make it a serious take home literary piece.
So, friends, this is a summing up that Professor Bajaj has given us, and it is very insightful, and I am sure you would have enjoyed the essay, the discussion on the essay. And it's a very provocative essay, presentation also at the same time. So thanks, Dr. Bajaj, on this,
Thank
and
you.
And readers. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thanks.